Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results. Hi, I'm Perry Holly, a Maxwell Leadership facilitator and coach.
And I'm Chris Cody, Executive Vice President with Maxwell Leadership. Welcome and thank you for joining. When we started this podcast, Perry, it was probably 8 years ago, a long time ago. We
I was going to say 202 years?
But we are grateful. We started it and really built the foundation off of John's 5 levels of leadership. And as we began looking at that model, we began to understand that it was common language that every organization that's trying to enhance their culture of leadership really needed to understand. So everything that we bring to you is based off that methodology and fits into one of those levels. And I love the fact that even our guest the last couple of weeks brought us 5 principles and 5 this. I always give Perry a hard time.
That's right.
And I'm grateful because he always brings content to me.
I wasn't going to say anything about, 5 of
and
this.
says that there's 5 of everything. Yeah. But if you're interested, we deliver this content both virtually and in person from a leadership standpoint, communication, all the competencies that you could think about that may be lagging in your organization or on the culture. We would love to help you. We would love to serve you with some of our executive facilitators and coaches and content piece. If that's the case, I'd love for you to visit maxwellleadership.com/podcast. And there you can fill out a form and our team will follow back up with you. Well, today's topic is titled, How Great Leaders Spend Their Time. I love this topic because we just didn't say how do leaders spend their time. You want to be a great leader, you better figure out how to spend your time.
That's right.
So I feel like this lesson is directed at me. And Joel, for those of you that haven't listened to our last 2 episodes, I'd encourage you to do that. To give you a little backstory, Joel has been a leader at all levels and has led through good times, through bad times. One of the greatest impacts on my life has been the book Love Works that he wrote, which is really his philosophy of leading people. And it's 7 timeless principles for effective leaders. You can find that at our website as well. We carry that book. Joel is one of our thought leaders. You'll be hearing more from him as we move forward. But he is a 3-time guest, and we told him as we got started, we said, well, the only reason it's really a 3-time guest, we don't know if it's a good or bad thing, is that we asked you to come do a podcast, and then we said, we're going to record 3. So he didn't have a choice.
Well, what he doesn't know is if he guesses on one more, he becomes co-host in your place.
Okay, anyways, moving on to the next point.
Moving on.
One of the things that Joel has partnered with us on is really coaching leaders in the C-suite and the executive space in a program that we call Executive Circle. And I've had the privilege to ride shotgun with him and listen and to the content and the conversation. And this topic today is something that he is dealing with and gets more questions, especially in his one-on-one coaching of those Executive Circle members. And it's just saying, hey, I'm overwhelmed in my job. There's not enough hours in a day. And where should I be spending my time? Where do I get the most efficiency out of my day? And you just share with them transparently. I've heard you say, I've done it wrong. I did it wrong for a lot of years. It cost me, it was a high price, and I spent 20 hours a day working. That's not the right way to go about it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about where Joel is and what he believes is how great leaders spend their time. Talk just as we introduce, talk a little bit about your heart for this message and what you're hearing from the leaders that you're coaching.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the introduction. And it really is because I've done it wrong through some of my career. And I've made some big mistakes, both personally and professionally, and we'll get to that. And I feel a huge burden to share what I've learned with other leaders because it is lonely and it's really, really hard work, and there's no playbook out there.
Right.
And I've done just a ton of learning myself, reading, talking to other CEOs, and have come up with this 5-part model. And I know a lot of things are in steps of 5, but
I love it.
But it ended up being so relevant that we made the entire Executive Circle curriculum around this. So Chris mentioned Executive Circle. It's 12 months of curriculum, but it's built around these 5 things because how you spend your time is everything. Yeah. And so it's just very near and dear to my heart.
That's good.
Well, let's start, number 1, I love it. It says, share the vision and strategy of your department or organization. Sounds simple, but that's pretty profound.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to give all 5 at a really, just so they know what's coming. That's because you wouldn't intuitively start here necessarily, but it's share the vision, where are we headed? The second thing is share the values of the company. The third, and live out the values of the company. The third is to manage the business. And the fourth is to make others successful. And the fifth thing is to keep yourself healthy. So that's what we're going to just walk through at a very high level. But sharing the vision is not just something that the CEO should do. It really, I don't care if you're managing one person or even managing your home, everyone should kind of share the vision of where we're headed. And I just mean directionally, what is the department's vision, what's the company's vision, and more importantly, how is every employee, they need to see their role in that. And when that happens, they come alive. And I think great visions, to that point, great visions go beyond the financials. It needs to be something that people can really connect to. It makes the world a better place. For instance, at Herschend Enterprises, which we run Dolly Parton's parks, it was make memories worth repeating for family. Or at SeaWorld, it was come to the park and help save the planet. And so everything they were doing was try to make the world a better place. And I just think that's really, really important because once you do that, people know what the plan is and they know what their role is within it.
I kind of was brought up that you share the vision at the January kickoff meeting, and that's enough because they got it. And you realize
hear from it again.
They don't got it. The continuous sharing. What's your view on how often do you do that?
You know, I do like at a big level, like high level, the CEO doing it at least annually like that. But then as you unpeel the onion, every strategy has a set of plans and tactics that every employee is assigned, and then there's key result areas for each of those tactics, right? It's like you got to hit a sales goal. How are you exactly going to do that? How many calls you're going to make? What's your close rate? Whatever. That should be reviewed weekly, I think. And so that when you get down to the frontline level, everyone should know what their role is rolling up to that macro strategy.
Why does what I do matter in the vision that we're doing
Exactly,
here?
exactly.
That's great. Well, the second one that you mentioned, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about is live the values of your department or organization. And when you first introduced it, you said, the values, and you said, no, live them out, right?
Yeah.
Live the values. Talk about the importance of that as a leader, spending their time living out their values.
Well, most companies that I've seen have what I would call, actually Cheryl Batchelor, CEO of Popeyes, used to say, we have a plaque problem, because people would put their values on a plaque. And that's it, right? Not a teeth plaque.
Oh, that's where I was going. I thought you were going to talk about the dentist.
Pull out the
Where are we
dental
going with
floss.
this?
No. It's so critical that every organization defines exactly what their values are. And you mentioned my book, and I appreciate that, but that's what Love Works is all about. Every company has do goals, and they should have be goals.
I love that.
The do goals are the financials. It's what we have to do to hit our targets. It's our sales, our margin. A lot of companies, other than putting on a plaque, don't focus on their be goals. And I think that's why cultures tend to be weak. And to have a strong culture, we need to define the values, your do and your be, and then everyone needs to try to live up to it. Now, everybody makes mistakes. Every day, even with Love Works, I probably made a mistake a day on the values. The key is, again, it's a vision.
Yeah.
How do we want to behave? How do we want our leaders to behave? And are people holding you accountable? And I knew the culture was really working when people would come into my office and say, you lost your patience, or you weren't very kind in this circumstance. And then the culture's working.
That's
so
good.
That's what I mean by living it out.
Catching people living the values, and what are those behaviors? I love that.
It's very hard to do sometimes.
And I recall, I read your book when it first came out, and about be and do was really, I had not thought about it that way. And I started sharing that on coaching calls. It really resonates with people that we're always talking about do, but nobody ever goes the further step about be, and
I
it made
think
a difference.
Someday I want to write a book about what it takes to really take those values and integrate it into the culture, because there's several steps to do that. You can't just talk about it. You have to teach it. You have to reinforce it. You have to promote it. And just only about 10% of the companies do that. So it's really important. If you want to be a great leader, this will really differentiate you.
So we're talking about what the leaders should do with their time, and this one seems kind of obvious: manage the business. But
Yeah.
go take that a little deeper for us.
It is obvious, Perry, but the key point is most leaders, they spend almost all their time there. So even though it's the third one, most people don't share the vision. They don't focus on living out the values, and they don't get to the last two either. So I think the key point to talk about in managing the business is how do we get out of some of the day-to-day and delegate more. And for me, it took me forever to learn this. In fact, when I was in the auto industry, I led as an expert. I started on the plant floor. I actually owned and ran car dealerships. So I had been everywhere, and I led as an expert much more autocratically. But when I went into the theme park business as a CEO, I was forced to be very Socratic and ask a ton of questions. But what I found is that allowed me to delegate more, and I could focus on the other areas of great leadership. And for people on the call or who are listening here to the podcast, if they struggle with delegation, I have one question it's really the best question I've ever been taught in delegating is, and the chairman taught me this at Herschend Enterprises, what is the worst thing that can happen, and can you live with it? What's the worst thing that can happen, and can you live with it? And more times than not, the downside isn't that great. And we should let go of those decisions so that we can focus on the other four parts of this model. And so if you struggle with delegation, it's just something to think about.
I love that. That comes up a lot. We always ask, we do a lot of 5 levels of leadership workshops and things, and it comes up about, are you doing the things that only you can do?
Yeah.
And are you delegating the other? And John Maxwell talks quite a bit about,
yes,
if somebody can do it 80% as well as you delegate, let it go. But almost every leader says, yeah, delegating, that's big. I said, how are you? Not very good.
Right.
Why? And it usually comes down to, I don't trust I can do it as well as I can. I just love what you just said. So what's the worst that can, say it again, what the worst that can happen?
And can I live with it? Or can the company live with it?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, man, I am so glad you brought that point. And you're right, John has talked about that every day when I went into work at SeaWorld and it was such a mess, I asked John's question, what are the things that only I can do? And that is a great question also for delegation. And when you get down to that, and sometimes we don't want to go there because we're uncomfortable with those things, even though they're the things that only I can do. They're very uncomfortable, and so you tend to go back to what you know and what you're comfortable with. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's a very important point, delegation.
Hey, podcast listeners. Do you have a clear plan for growth? Achieving big results most often does not require big life changes. Small improvements over time compound into big results. Download the Maxwell Leadership app. It's the new free app where our expert guides and John Maxwell help you pace your leadership journey and set a clear plan for your own personal growth. You can also find all sorts of resources on the Maxwell Leadership app, including this podcast, information on upcoming events, and much more. Just search Maxwell Leadership in your app store and download the app today.
All right. Well, number 4 on your list, before I go to number 4, it was interesting you said it's in the middle, manage the business. And when you look at it, it's almost the sandwich effect. You got the 2 heavy that you said are people-oriented on the top, 1 and 2, and on the bottom, 4 and 5, about yourself, about other people. It's about the people side of things. This is as well about managed business. There's some delegating, all that stuff. But it's interesting how you put it right in the middle. You probably intentionally did that.
I did.
And I just kind of realized it now. For all the times I've heard you talk about this, I hadn't really put it together just now. It's like, it's interesting that it's sitting right there in the middle between those 2 pivotal parts of, remember what we're talking about here. So we're talking about how do great leaders spend their time.
Right.
And you kind of put it right there in the middle. So I was just thought about that. I had a little aha moment as we were going through this.
And yet sometimes people think it should be first.
Right.
That's what everyone thinks of as leadership is like, well, I just got to run the business.
Yeah.
Not to be a great leader, you have to do the other things.
Yeah, love it. Yeah. And so many people aren't getting that right. That's why it's the number 1 question that you're getting through the executive circle. So, all right. Well, the 4th one is making others successful. So as we move back into this, the people side of the 5 things, man, most leaders, one of the things we talk about in the 5 levels of leadership is that level 4 is when you begin to develop other people. They look at you as someone that's adding value to them, and you become a people developer. You're reproducing yourself. One of the things that really pains us in all the work that we do around the world is there seems to be a lid at level 3. People understand their job and their role. They understand they got to connect with people. They have to manage a business, KPIs, and then it just stops. They don't get this next part of what you're talking about right here, which is, hey, we have to invest in, raise up, and develop and empower other people and make them successful.
Yeah.
John wrote a book called The Leader's Greatest Return. People are like, where's the financials for this greatest return, right? And you're missing the point. It has nothing to do about the financial return. It has to do with exactly what you're talking about here, which is making others successful.
And it is one of John's mantras, and he's taught it for so long.
Yeah.
And he's dead on right, because you're right. Most people hit a ceiling here. And there's been a lot written about how to make others successful, but I think the obvious is put people where they're passionate, put people where they have energy. That is intuitive. I think why so many people fail, though, it's the soft side that is challenging, and we have to have really tough conversations. And with remote work, it makes it even harder, because it's tough to have a tough conversation over the phone.
On a screen or on the phone.
But and these things that I see, first of all, a lack of clarity. People aren't clear what they're supposed to do, and the leader has to make sure there's clarity. Another thing is a lack of trust. If you can feel it and see it, but somehow that leader needs to develop trust. Another one is micromanaging. Like, sometimes we see leaders micromanaging and we don't want to call them out on it, but they're losing good people because they're micromanaging. And I know these are negative things, quote unquote, but this is where I see most leaders fail to have those tough conversations, or somebody doesn't like conflict. And they see conflict between their employees, and they're not addressing that conflict. And so I think to go to that next level, I do think you have to coach people to be successful, but see the problems and have those difficult conversations with them.
Good. I know this question is an entire podcast in itself, but
it really is
about trust. You said that. I know that most of the leaders, actually all the leaders I've worked with, they're not lying, cheating, and stealing.
No.
So they're not doing the big things. What do you think? And this is what you can make a whole podcast out of this answer, I'm sure. But what are the single thing you see where trust breaks down between a leader and their team when they're not obviously doing anything bad?
Yep.
But what are they doing?
That's a great question, Perry. One thing that pops into mind is when a leader gives an assignment, or he delegates or she delegates, and it's not quite done well. And instead of going back and saying, you really messed this up, here's how I'd like to see it next time, get back on your horse and do it again. Instead of doing that, they divert it to somebody else, or they give the project to somebody else, or they aren't honest and they don't confront conflict. Really, and then that person loses trust immediately for the leader. And I see that over and over again. That's when I said not managing conflict. It's having that difficult conversation is so important. So that's what comes to mind.
Love that. Number 5, this is going to be huge. Keep yourself healthy. Boy, I love that you have that in there, but please tell me more.
Well, it didn't used to be in there for me. I had this 4-part model for a long time. I added it because my biggest failures in life, both personally and professionally, have come because I didn't keep myself healthy.
Wow.
And if I can do anything to stop someone else from going through what I went through, whether it's at the turnaround at SeaWorld, I was working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. I hate to admit, but there was a part of my career where drinking was an issue because I was so stressed, and I just needed an out. And I'm not proud of that, but I sought help. And people who read my book know this. I went through. I actually lost my first marriage, which is the biggest. I can hardly talk about it. It's the biggest failure of my life. And, I hate divorce. I hate that it happened. but it was because I didn't stay healthy. I didn't watch out for the red flags. And so my big advice to people is, get rest, look for the red flags, and if you're too stressed and you go to bad behavior, whatever that dysfunctional behavior is, get help. Get help now before it's too late. And we as leaders, even just getting rest, a great leader has to be rested. An unrested leader will not be a great leader. So even if it's just getting that, which is much lighter, it's still very, very important.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency and the heart behind that.
Yes.
And, it makes me think about this last one that you added. Now that you're on the other side of this intense leadership journey, you're still leading in many different ways, but you're calling out saying, hey, I got to lead myself first. And
Right.
And John has always taught us we're the hardest person to lead, right? Like I got all kinds of excuses and things. And I think, man, if you are listening to this podcast and you go, man, that's me. This guy right here has a heart to serve and add value to you. That's why he's one of our thought leaders. He has our DNA in and through him and leading at the highest level. And so that last message was worth the entire podcast for me. And so I hope it was for you as well. The 5 things real quick, I'll just kind of recap as I wrap up today, and I'll let Perry close us, is remember, Perry made a statement that he's heard. What are the things as a leader that only you can be doing for the organization?
Right.
And begin evaluating that. Begin writing that down. And don't be so prideful that the list is 427 things, right? Like, because it's really probably only about 3 or 4 things. And so in these 5 parts, I think as you think through that, you can look at each one of these and what is it in that area. And so Joel shared with us, make sure you're sharing the vision and the strategy with your organization. Or if you're a leader, it's your team, right? And how you tie that to the bigger vision of the company and then down even into the individual roles. Live out the values. Your team sees you. They're watching you all the time. They're aware of that. The organization sees you. Manage the business, make others successful, and keep yourself healthy. I just want to close with this. If you are interested, again, and go back to this executive circle, it's Joel's heart, and you're at a place where you say, man, this is lonely, or I need some help with one of these areas. That's what Joel wants to do in this next season of his life. And so I want to encourage you to go to maxwellleadership.com/executive circle. You can fill out a form there, and our team will follow back up with you and how to do that and join one of Joel's groups. So thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you. I really
Transparency.
appreciate it. Thanks, Barry.
Yes, thanks, Joel. It's been great to have you, and it's been very meaningful for all of us. I just want to remind you, if you want to get the learner guide for this episode, you can do that at maxwellleadership.com/podcast. You can also leave a question or a comment for us there. We always love hearing from you, and we're very grateful you'd spend this time with us. That's all today from the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast.